Control 4. How can we protect crops from pests more sustainably? This leads into one of the FRQs that you guys are doing. So, natural controls. Pests. First off, a pest is anything that we as humans deem annoying and counterproductive to our needs. So anything that interferes with crops, lawn growth, right? Things that we don't like. And we want our crops to grow. We don't want you to eat them, even though we're planting delicious food for a variety of different animals. Over only 100 species of plants, animals, mostly insects, fungi, and other microbes cause most crop damage. 100 different species. That's kind of crazy. When there are over 1.3 million different species of insects identified, only 100 are doing the damage. Natural enemies. So one thing we'll talk about is biological control. Predators that control pest species, other pest species. This is a spider. Might be hard to see in current light conditions, but spiders kill more insects every single year than the pesticides used in the pesticide industry. So love your spiders, man. Don't squish them when you see them. There's very, very few spiders that are venomous enough to kill you or to hurt you severely. Most of them, nothing. When I see spiders, I'm like, yeah, thanks for eating the insects. I appreciate it. Okay, so different types of pesticides. This is the generic name. Insecticides, kill insects. Herbicides, kills plants and weeds. Fungicides, kill fungus. And rodenticides, kill rodents, right? All right. So, first and second generation pesticides. First generation pesticides are the ones that we get from nature. Take a wax myrtle. If you don't know what a wax myrtle is, it's a native plant we have here in Florida. Let me know and I'll show you one on campus. You take it, you crush up the leaves, rub it on yourself. Great insect repellent if you're ever out camping and you forgot your DEET spray. Nicotine, the tobacco plant. Nicotine, which people consume to get a stimulant, to get stimulated from it, that is a naturally occurring pesticide, and it was created by the plant to keep insects from eating it. So it's a naturally occurring pesticide. Once we take those naturally occurring pesticides and we bring them into the lab and change around the the molecular structure, or we just manufacture new chemicals in the lab, now we're talking second generation. Things we've manufactured in the laboratory. Broad spectrum agents mean they kill everything, right? So a broad spectrum insecticide is going to kill every insect it touches, which we use a lot of them, and that's very bad. Narrow spectrum agents are going to target specific organisms, right? They're narrowly targeting things. Got it? And persistence. Persistence is how long these chemicals remain in the environment and remain harmful, okay? So your naturally occurring pesticides, once they make it out of the plant into the environment, they break down relatively quickly. The ones that are made in the lab stick around for a long time. They are made that way, made to be persistent. And at face value, that sounds good, so it will continue to protect your crops, but in the long run, it ends up in the waterways, ends up downstream, stays in our food for a long time, gets into our bodies, causes cancer, kills way more insects than we ever thought. Not a good thing. Oh, we've got Rachel Carson here, and let me talk about her really quick. 1962, she released what book? Silent Spring. Good job. And that became the movement that got rid of a broad spectrum agent called DDT, which is right there on the top. DDT was used to kill everything, and I mean, there's pictures and videos of the DDT truck rolling up, and kids would be at a park with their parents, and they'd send them over to the truck, and the guy would spray them down, give them a nice sheen of DDT to protect them from the insects. Now we realize that it got into birds, went through the food chain. The birds could not form thick enough eggshells. They would set their eggs, crush their young, so we started having massive die-offs of a lot of these animals. It also ripped through lots of other parts of the ecosystems, devastating bees, devastating other pollinators, and it was eventually banned due to her work in 1972. She died in 1964, but her work continued to inspire people, and they got rid of it. They banned it in the United States in 72. It's still made and still used in other countries. And you might say, well, that's atrocious. Why would we ever do something like that? The problem is it's a great killer of mosquitoes. And there's over 1 million people who die every year from malaria, which is transmitted by mosquitoes. So it's still used in although in a much more limited basis in these developing countries where malaria is very prevalent. Advantages and disadvantages of conventional chemical pesticides. Pause here, take a look at them, or look them up in your book. In chapter 12, you will find them. So alternatives to conventional pesticides. Number 1 says, fool the pest. We can rotate crops. In my garden on campus, I know that where I plant tomatoes, insects love them. Pests love them. Fungus loves them. So once I plant tomatoes in a growing bed, I don't plant anything else there because it's going to destroy those other crops. Okay? But what I could do is I could rotate something in that I don't want to harvest. Something like mustard, right? It's got a lot of spices in there. I could grow mustard greens, right? And then turn them into the dirt and let it break apart and degrade. And that spice that's in there, or even hot peppers, right, would go in there and it would kill those microbes. So you can change what you grow on a large scale to fool the pests, because one pest might eat one thing, and if you put a different crop in there all of a sudden, now it's not going to eat that anymore. It goes, what the hell? And it takes off. Provide a home for pest enemies. If you've got something that you know eats the pest that you can't stand, make sure that your garden or your farm is a nice place for that enemy to come into and hang out, so it comes and eats the thing you want to control. Let's see here. Genetic resistance, and this is something called biological control. I think this is where I want to talk about that. So you can when you use one living creature to control the population of another, that's called biological control. An example of this, and I think it's a video in our Blackboard folder right now, talks about how in Australia they brought in 25 rabbits to give the farmers something to hunt for fun, right? And then they released them. They became millions of rabbits, and then they didn't know what to do with all these rabbits. So they found a natural predator, which is in North America, the fox is a natural predator of the rabbit. So now they imported the fox to take care of the rabbit problem. It's a form of biological control, using one organism to control another. Now sometimes this works great. We're currently doing the same thing right now. We imported beetles from China to eat the air potato that we have here in Florida, and it's working quite well right now. Sometimes, though, there can be an issue. So, the foxes that were supposed to eat the rabbits are fast. There in Australia, there were a lot of little teeny tiny marsupials, rabbit size, that had no natural predators ever, so they're not fast. They don't run away. And they were all driven almost to extinction by the fox. Because they said, why am I going to chase that fast-moving rabbit when that little tiny numbat right there, it's called a numbat, it's a small animal, look it up, isn't running away from me. I'm going to eat that guy instead. So there can be very detrimental effects from that practice, so you got to be careful. Genetic resistance, we can go in now and we can manipulate the genes of organisms to make them more resistant to different pests. Natural enemies, that goes with the one above, provide homes for pest enemies. I already talked about that, biological control. Pheromones, we'll set up traps sometimes for pest organisms. You take some hormones that tell the pests, hey, it's mating season over here, so you might want to come in, and then they fly into wherever that bait is, and then you trap them. And then hormones, they're doing this a lot with some mosquitoes. What they do is they mess with the hormones in the males, so that way, and then they release them, and the change in hormones has made the male mosquito sterile. Then they go out and they go and they mate with females, and they mate, and the females go to lay their eggs, but they're not fertilized, and they just don't know it, and then that makes that next generation null and void. Integrated pest management system. We want to get away from eventually using just conventional pesticides, especially because what we do when we use conventional pesticides, just like we've made antibiotic resistance, right? Every time we take an antibiotic or use a conventional pesticide, we kill only the organisms susceptible to that chemical. Any that are left behind were resistant to it, naturally just resistant. Now they repopulate the population. So eventually, every antibiotic and every pesticide ever made is going to become useless. So what we do in the short run is, at each successive application, We just use more and more and more of it. So if you look at the curve of the quantity of pesticides used in the United States, it's like a J-shaped exponential curve because we have to use more and more and more to kill less and less and less of these insects. So eventually the pests will become resistant to them, and then we'll be forced to use integrated pest management system. But until then, why is it beneficial? You're using more than one approach, so you don't have to rely so heavily on one thing. And since we know that conventional pesticides are so toxic and harmful, it takes some of our reliance off of that. Why can it be bad? You do have to have somebody who's very knowledgeable in the insects you're trying to control and can give you other ideas. It may be useful for this one insect on this one crop, but not this insect on this crop. It's very expensive, and a lot of that cost comes because the things that are subsidized are the big chemical manufacturing companies. They're given the tax breaks and the subsidies to make the conventional chemicals, and the people trying to push the integrated pest management, therefore, are not in the same level playing field because they're not getting any of those subsidies or tax breaks. So it makes it hard to start those things. All right? I think that's the last slide. Yes. We got one more 12-6 coming up in just a minute.